Colleagues, welcome to this second seminar in the series that we are doing under the Task Force 3 of T20. So, as Professor Sachin has asked me to, start this session, and then he would join in some time. But I think our speakers for the day have already joined. We are waiting for Dr. Ashok Khosla, uh, of course, but in India it's already 3 p.m., so we are good to go with this seminar. Once again, let me welcome everyone for this exciting series of conversations that we have started last week, and we had a very overwhelming response for this seminar series. Apart from the task force co-chairs, we also have a large number of participants joining from across time zones, which also includes our co-authors of the policy briefs, with whom we have shared the links of this seminar series so that they can participate and share their perspectives, and also with people beyond this task force so that we can share. And that was the whole purpose of having public webinar series, so that apart from the discussions that we were having as part of the task force, we can share some ideas with others as well in terms of the purpose and the rationale of this particular task force. To everyone who have joined this meeting and may not be aware of some of the details as to how the T20 process works. As, huh? It's okay. So, Think 20 is engagement group of the G20, one of the 11 engagement group, very prominent one, usually comprising of academics and experts on specific subjects. So this has continued for some time now. So usually task forces on specific areas are convened and created. As part of the process, when the Think 20 process was initiated in India, uh, aligned with India's priority, G20 priority on life, that is lifestyle for environment, which talks about, uh, you know, moving towards sustainable living to bring in substantive and substantial changes and transformations in the way individual behaviors and institutional processes work, so that we urgently manage the climate crisis that is out there, and also try to tackle other inequalities that are around. So with that objective, this particular task force was launched, which is called Life, Resilience and Values for Well-being, which also means that we are not leaving aside the normative frameworks, and we can very well inform the other groups that are part of the Think 20 process, and also the specific working groups within the government that would take up the messages that we may eventually come up with. So today's seminar, which is second in the series, is devoted to sustainable consumption and production, looking at the climate crisis and also issues around One Health. And with us, we have very distinguished, some of our very distinguished co-chairs, although you can see many of them on the screen. Some of them will speak elaborately on the subject. We have overall 23 very distinguished academic as co-chairs from across the globe. We are very privileged to have with us today Dr. Noora Mansoori. We are awaiting Dr. Ashok Khosla to join us, Professor Ruby Pavankar, and Professor T.C. James. So I would, each one of you would have around 10 minutes to speak, maybe your initial round of thought, and I would like to introduce, and then we of course open up like last time. We open up for questions and answers for participants all across. I would request everyone to use the chat box to post their specific questions. So, I mean, before I hand over the mic to Dr. Nora, let me briefly introduce her. She is fellow at KAPSARC in Saudi Arabia, a very prominent think tank, and an expert at the World Energy Council. She is the co-chair of has been the co-chair of T20 Indonesia Task Force on Governing Climate Target, Energy Transition and Environmental Protection, and has been a veteran of the Think 20 process and leading this particular task force on climate and energy for quite some years now, starting with the Italian presidency. Dr. Mansouri has several years of research experience. She earned her MBA and PhD degrees in climate and sustainability and energy transitions from the University of London and completed postdoctoral fellowship at MIT, and has authored very popular books like Greening the Black Gold, Saudi Arabia's Quest for Clean Energy. So with this, I hand over the mic to Dr. Nora. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sabayasachi, for this very kind introduction.
Dr. Nora, you are on mute, I suppose.
Am I on mute?
No.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can hear you.
We can hear.
Okay. Thank you for the confirmation. Thank you, Sabayasachi, for the kind introduction. Just a quick correction. The T20 journey, my T20 journey started under the Saudi G20 presidency in 2020. So it's a pleasure to see you all, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation and for this very valuable series of webinars. Today, I'll be talking about integrating the circular carbon economy and the lifestyle for environment frameworks for promoting sustainable consumption through nudging individual behavior. As you may all know, consumption patterns around the world have led to significant environmental and social challenges, particularly in G20 countries, which are responsible for the majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. So sustainable consumption has emerged as a potential solution, but it faces a lot of challenges and obstacles. The current consumption patterns pose several challenges to sustainable development. The growth in consumption globally has resulted in increased demand for energy, for materials, for natural resources, leading to environmental degradation and rising carbon emissions. And the key reports on the limits of growth from 1972 highlights the need to manage consumption patterns to achieve sustainable development. In fact, we have a specific sustainable development goal on achieving sustainable and ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. So this is yet another global challenge and global goal that the world has to balance with the other sustainable development goals for achieving sustainable development. Now, the G20's role is critical, of course. It not only is it a powerful group of countries, but it's also responsible for 75% of global GDP and 80% of global greenhouse gas emission, as well as it makes up 60% of the global population. And the G20 has recognized the importance of promoting sustainable consumption and has made several commitments towards achieving this goal. The G20 action plan on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, which was adopted in 2017, calls for the promotion of sustainable consumption and production patterns. The G20 also endorsed the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns, which aim to accelerate the shift towards sustainable consumption and production patterns. However, there are challenges that and significant challenges that the countries of the G20 face in achieving sustainable consumption. For example, in 2017, the average American consumed more than double the global average of natural resources, while the average Indian consumed only 1/3 of the global average. Additionally, global food waste amounted to 1.3 billion tons in 2019, with G20 countries being responsible for over 75% of that waste. Now, to focus on the recommendations and the way forward here, of course, as the world is facing unprecedented challenges of climate change, but also the need to mitigate the impacts of climate change and the need to shift towards circular economy, the circular carbon economy was formulated and endorsed at the G20 Saudi 2020 presidency. And today we see the lifestyle for environment, which was proposed by India as a framework under the Indian G20 presidency. So the circular carbon economy and the lifestyle for environment, the CCE and LIFE frameworks are two significant initiatives introduced at the global level to promote sustainable consumption and production, sustainable growth and energy transition towards carbon circularity and neutrality. And there is merit in integrating both the CCE and the LIFE frameworks through nudging individual behavior. So it's taking this global framework and applying it at the individual level to promote sustainable consumption, sustainable growth, and energy transition toward carbon circularity and neutrality. Of course, the CCE framework, which emphasizes the 4 Rs, reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove, has not been explored at the individual level. But here we are suggesting that, it is essential to manage emissions at all the levels, at the international level, the national level, and the individual level. And the LIFE framework, introduced by India's Prime Minister Modi at COP26, would entail a change in individual and societal behavior with respect to sustainable consumption and production, and that would have an impact at the national and global level. So the integration of both CCE and LIFE can promote sustainable consumption and can address the challenge of overconsumption. And by doing so, we can use nudging individual behaviors to encourage choices that they make, more sustainable choices, and make these sustainable options accessible, attractive, and convenient. So through several approaches, countries can help individuals and the population of countries to make more sustainable consumption options and reduce their carbon emissions. Such integration can be achieved through raising awareness, encouraging behavior change, through nudging strategies to encourage behavior changes, incentivize sustainable practices, create an infrastructure for sustainable practices, and foster collaboration between different entities, the government, the businesses, and individual, to essentially promote sustainable consumption practices and circular economy practices, which will ultimately reduce the carbon footprint of individuals. So if we talk about the integration of both the CCE and the LIFE, strategies would include things like product design and reuse and recycling. So designing the products from the start with the intention to prolong the lifespan and making them easier to recycle, and for the individuals to make that more sustainable, more mindful choice when purchasing products. Establishing also a closed loop supply chain where the circular supply chain can minimize the waste and minimize the resource efficiency. Also collaborative consumption, the sharing economy has emerged over several years, and it is important to encourage such collaborative consumption, which will ultimately reduce the use per individuals. And also the Waste to Resources initiative to encourage using the waste and capitalizing on the waste to be recycled and used into resources and other, products like composting programs and so on. And really nudging toward reducing the carbon footprint. So this is at the country level and the global level to nudge individual behavior to make more sustainable options. So if To end with key recommendations for the G20 governments, I would say provide technical and financial support for live programs in the Global South, promote circular carbon economy practices in the Global South, develop partnerships with Global South countries to encourage sustainable consumption and production practices, support technology transfer to facilitate the adoption of sustainable practices from the Global North to the Global South, and encourage the use of financial incentives to promote sustainable consumption and production practices. And finally, foster the partnerships and collaboration across the world, but also from the public and private sectors to promote sustainable consumption and production practices. And with that, I'm going to end here and we'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nora, for sharing your ideas. Let me now move to Dr. Ashok Khosla, who has already joined us. Very privileged to have you, sir. Just to give a brief introduction, of course, he needs no introduction in India. Dr. Khosla founded Development Alternatives in 1982 as a major step towards fulfilling his dream of sustainable development. He has worked tirelessly over the years, as you know, to demonstrate the theory and practice of sustainable development through his teaching, inspiring inspirations and fostering and delivery of environmentally friendly, commercially viable technologies. He is a PhD in experimental physics from Harvard University. He has chaired and managed positions of eminence globally, including right from 1976 onwards at various levels in Government of India, at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Club of Rome, United Nations International Resource Panel. So he has been leading several of these initiatives. His work and expertise has been recognized globally with accolades. In 2002, he was awarded the United Nations Sasakawa Environmental Prize. This was followed by Schwab Foundation Award for Outstanding Social Entrepreneurship in 2004. He is also Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, in 2008, and Duke of Edinburgh Conservation Medal in 2011. So extremely honored and privileged to have you, sir, with us. Over to you.
Thank you. I believe I'm unmuted, and I'm trying to get my shared screen going. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we can. You have to just maximize your screen. Yeah. Yeah, now it is full screen and we can also very clearly hear you.
Wonderful. So I would like really to share a few ideas with you about alternative solutions to today's, what I would consider, two biggest global predicaments. One is pervasive poverty and the other is environmental emergencies. Much of what I say is derived from insights and inspirations that we got from the work and life of Mahatma Gandhi. And I think you will see during my presentation that this is a particular viewpoint, which I think is very important for the future of the planet and of people and civilization, but not necessarily considered by everyone to be modern, though I will try to show that it is actually postmodern. It goes beyond. So when we set up G20, wherever we talk about G20, it says the purpose of it is to foster discussion among like-minded countries or unlike-minded countries, but discussion on what? And I think we've got to define what the vision and mission of G20 is, which is not actually in the literature very clearly defined, other than being a platform, forum for people to talk. And I believe that is well-being and fulfillment for all and forever. And I believe that it should keep that in mind if it agrees that that is a good one. The progress that we've made over the last couple of 100 years is incredible. We live longer and healthier and more comfortable lives. We have more things, more knowledge, more mobility than anyone had before. And we're largely well-nourished and well organized as a whole. Some of us have beautiful possessions and great opportunities. We have choices and unlimited choices and lots of things. And we have rampant consumption driven by greed much more than need. And we basically need to recognize that we have a very good life for some of us. And it's a world in which the global income is shared very unevenly. This is the diagram, we call it the champagne glass theory of life, which came on the first Human Development Report of UNDP in 1991, which showed that some 20% of the people in the world get some 80% of the global income, and the bottom 50% get something of the order of 5 or 6%, which is an extremely uneven world. And in 1991, it was 80-20, but by the year 2007, let's say about 15, 16 years later, the champagne glass had actually turned into a bar stool in which we don't talk about 2080, we talk about 1 in 99. 99% of the world's income goes to the 1% of that world. And this is what we might call affluenza. It's a disease that afflicts mankind. And in a recent report by Oxfam to the World Economic Forum, they showed that some 8 people in the world actually have the same wealth as the bottom 3.7 billion poorest in the world. The half of the population of the world shares as much as 8 billionaires. We live in a linear economy. We take stuff out of the ground, we transform it into usable products, we use them, and then we throw them away. And there's huge environmental and social and economic disruption at each one of these steps, leading to things like climate change, droughts worldwide. Some 400 million people live under extreme drought conditions around the world. Extreme events like hurricanes and forest fires. We basically, I'm not sure what happened here. Let me see. I have got stuck a bit.
But we can see your screen. You can either minimize one of your screens. I think the PowerPoint is hiding behind your present screen. So
Where is that? It's got stuck at this point.
I think you can close and then reshare again and come to the slide.
You want me to close the PowerPoint? And here we are.
No,
Okay.
it's come. It has come. Yeah.
All right.
Mm.
And we're desertifying the world at an incredible rate. UNEP claims that the deserts of the planet are growing at some 50,000 square kilometers per year, which is a phenomenal rate for us to lose land. And our species are going extinct. Here is a very important species called the rosy periwinkle, which grows in a few hectares in Madagascar, which is the source of a major pharmaceutical product for curing childhood leukemia. And once it disappears, there won't be any other cure. This is a tiger, a national animal of India, which is battling for survival. We're down to some 2,000 or 3,000 animals in the country and about 5,000 in the world. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were 100,000 of these. So we're losing, our valuable resources at an incredible rate. And we're growing lopsided, chaotic urban environments. We have a financial crisis every decade or so. And we've got to ask also, in this bar stool regime, what about those who got left behind? What about the poor, the people who are suffering from a disease we might call povertitis, which is really massive underconsumption for a decent life? They are people living in slums, in cities. They are in rural areas, in a poverty trap, which is almost permanent. Poverty leads to having to destroy the local environment. to get very little income, to have large families, and with no markets, you can all see that we have rampant hunger and undernourishment. It's not only a massive tragedy for the people concerned from a human rights point of view, but from a national development point of view, one has to wonder how many valuable resources are being lost because of lack of opportunities. About 1 billion or so people in the world don't have adequate drinking water. The 300 million is for India, and we basically have undernourishment, which is also rampant. Here is a family of about 6 people whose entire food for 1 week is in that picture. It's worth roughly €3 to live on. Today's big threats to mission life are essentially characterized by what people now call polycrises, and they consist essentially of pollution and population growth and population decline in other countries, poverty, biodiversity, climate, resources, social breakdown, and financial breakdowns, and many other things. So our barstool distribution basically is a mix of both overconsumption and underconsumption. And both are very destructive of the global resources as well as the future. We all know about the ecological footprint, the amount of land needed to support one person, and you can see the growth of that from the mid-20th century till the middle of this century. We are going to be needing more than the resources that are provided by 2 planet Earths, which is why some people are trying to escape from the Earth. And such a footprint basically becomes an economic boot crush. Through lopsided development, the rich and the affluent tend to deprive the others of what they're entitled to. And this is because our economies are basically predicated on more growth, more foreign direct investment, higher stock market indexes, growth rates up, rising foreign portfolios, bigger profits, and increasing GDP. So if that mindset continues, in this screen, you actually have the causes of a large part of our problems today. Today's vision of development is basically violence of all kinds against people, against nature, and even against cultures. And we live in a world where there's a few, 1/3 probably, who live in a very highly consuming society, and the other 2/3 in a subsistence society trying to find a way to survive. Both affluenza and povertitis lead to all kinds of problems, including diseases and influenza and various other kinds of viral diseases. And we've got to recognize that healthy people need both a healthy planet and healthy local communities. And that is basically what I think the G20 configuration should be essentially looking at all over the world. We must now learn how to nurture all types of capital, human capital, physical capital, natural capital, in addition to what we do know how to do, which is financial capital. To create empowering policies and action that will get us to where we want to go, you need 3 broad categories of attention, which is now at the moment lacking. One is for generating income and work. Second is for making the environment, doing everything to create a clean and green environment. And the third is to empower communities. And to do that, I would say that there are basically 2 types of approaches for each. One is employment, probably the number 1 issue in the world, and to create that employment, enterprise development. To preserve our natural resources and use clean technology are the 2 for the clean and green environment, and developing institutions that help people access their entitlements and fulfilling basic needs: food, shelter, clothing, health care, and education, and the things that make life good. So what kind of a world do we need? We want a world in which people have their basic needs, that have jobs, that have healthy, productive, natural resources, our lands and soils, our rivers and streams, our forests, our wetlands, our culture and heritage. All of these are basically more or less forgotten in the policies of most G20 countries. And unless we bring them back, I don't think we could achieve the kind of mission and vision that I was talking about. Now we have to learn to live in harmony with nature and with each other. And in order to do that, we have the classic sustainability model, which is the three strands that comprise sustainable futures, which is taking care of social and community assets, the environment, and the economy. At the moment, we live in a linear economy, taking, as I said, raw materials from Mother Earth and messing around with them and then throwing them away as waste. But we now need to turn that into a circular economy where by design, we can essentially reuse and recycle materials and generate products from non-virgin materials. Frugal technologies is another area that we really have to address, something that the G20 could really promote in a large way. This is a building in South Delhi which has less than 20% virgin materials. It's almost entirely made of construction and demolition waste, from mining waste, from waste from power stations and industries, and it's a very elegant and very usable building, and at the same time, it has a very low impact on the carbon, on the water, and on the other issues that create problems for us with climate change and so on. It happens to be the headquarters of our own organization in Delhi, but it's a demonstration of how you can do more with less from Mother Earth. So what are the alternatives? How does the G20 show how all economies can be inclusive and sustainable? Well, we can learn from ancient wisdom, from Lord Buddha, for example, who says, harm no person, animal, plant, or mineral, and that we all share this world. We have to learn to live in harmony and peace with each other and with nature. I think more closer in history to us are the lessons that Mahatma Gandhi talked about. The earth, the air, the land, and water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand over to them at least as it was handed over to us. In other words, how can we be as good ancestors for future generations as ours were for us? Back to the future. Mahatma Gandhi, in my opinion, was an amazing pioneer ecologist. He had a deep understanding of how ecosystems work, great systems thinker. He was the first postmodernist, I believe, who had an understanding of how humanity and nature are going to have to be seen as one. And he was a quite original economist. The earth provides enough for everyone's need, but not for even one man's greed. So the idea of sufficiency and moderacy were important. You have to have sufficient amount to live a decent life, but you have to moderate the amount you use so that you don't deprive other people from having their sufficiency. And that brings me to the idea that's got to be central in G20 discussions, which is contraction and convergence. The rich, overutilizing resources have to contract, we have to bring down the use of materials and energy and water, allowing the poor who underuse these, who don't have access to enough, to be able to raise them and in due course converge at a level that the planet can sustain. So sustainability issues for future global agreements that G20 could promote are equity with efficiency, a resource convention is needed, a plastic waste treaty is needed, a standard protocol for hydropower would be very important, and things of that sort is, I think, a central job for G20 to be propagating. Since it's such a large part of the global economy, it can influence others to do that. The issues that we have to deal with are rapidly growing in complexity, both because of the possibilities and because of the constraints. And this means that there has to be a much better mutual understanding between policymakers and scientists, and indeed between governments and civil society. So that brings me towards the end, which is that we need to espouse Gandhian values about truth and reverence for life. He had specific uh, Sanskrit terms for these: Sarvodaya and Antodaya, self-help and empowerment; Swadeshi, which means self-reliance; secularism, rights and responsibilities; common and individual property; and the need to address needs rather than greeds. These insights that Gandhi brought into our language included trusteeship as the basis of responsible business, trusteeship of people who are privileged for being guardians of the global commons, local economies, Swadeshi, technologies, frugal technology, as I was saying, where technology is the servant and not the master, efficiency and no waste, central to Gandhian thought, grassroots democracy, and responsible government and community ownership. So this young girl with two brothers, one in her lap, is simply asking us, what can you do for us? Her original question, of course, was, what can I do for my country? But that's beside the point. So as a final thought from Gandhi, I would just like to say that his idea of putting the last first in all policy and action is really the only way to go forward with a sane, sustainable future. We're dealing with planetary problems, and they need planetary solutions. And planetary solutions need international cooperation of the kind that G20 should make possible. We have to now deal with the local and the global, which is often called glocal, and we need now mechanisms to bridge the small with the big, and that's not happening fast enough. So this is the purpose of sustainable development, and she basically deserves a better world than we are at the moment leaving for her. And the ideas that I've just been talking about are really about making sure that her life and her future is based on a more humane approach to the economy. Systemic issues are what G20 is about. We've got to combine basic needs with the imperatives of the environment. We need production systems and consumption patterns that are less threatening to Mother Earth. And we need to bring together a blend of northern concerns and southern imperatives, as you can see in the pictures. And finally, the sustainable jobs need to be melded with sustained resources. This is the only way that we can fulfill the saying of Mahatma Gandhi, to be the change that you want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I mean, your eloquence on the subject and whatever you have shared with us perhaps captures the entire scope and rationale for this task force and why we are together. And as they say that pictures speak 1,000 words, it has really done so, and you have shown the good, bad, and the ugly. That's all around. So thank you for that. And I now move to our next speaker, Professor Ruby Pawankar. Of course, today we are discussing the larger paradigm of sustainable consumption and production and climate crisis, and also trying to interpret its relevance and impact and influence on One Health that is becoming all the more important. You have, Dr. Khosla has just highlighted some bit of a connect that we saw, and we expect more to come from our following speakers, Professor Ruby Pawankar and Professor James. Professor Ruby Pawankar, of course, is a professor, a medical doctor, professor in the Division of Allergy, Department of Pediatrics, Nippon Medical School, Tokyo, Japan. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. Of course, she is also Executive Director, immediate past President of the Asia Pacific Association of Allergy and Asthma and Clinical Immunology. She was also part of the World Allergy Organization. Her efforts have focused on addressing the global burden of allergic disease and non-communicable diseases, One Health, climate change, air pollution, and impact on NCDs. She has been an expert panelist at United Nations Rio Plus 20 Biodiversity on Environment, Health, and engages with COP as an advisor on expert panels with WHO. So over to you, ma'am, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Said, for your kind introduction. I really thank the chairs of T20, of the G20 for giving me this opportunity to be part of this distinguished group. And I hope I would be able to contribute enough so that we could come up with very good recommendations for India's presidency of G20. This is, in fact, a very important platform because what we actually bring out of this G20 recommendations would be important, not just for India, but across countries, the G20 countries, and even probably relate more beyond those countries, like even G100, I would say. So it's when we talk about, my two elegant speakers before me have very nicely touched upon important aspects, just about, especially the circular economy. And I think it's very, very important to integrate everything that we talk today as part of one single mission. And under this special task force on life, resilience, and well-being, I think this is a very, very important task force under Prime Minister Modi's personal vision on life as an important aspect. And I always talk as a medical doctor, before I even start my talk, I would just say that we always talk about treating diseases. We always talk about what's the best cutting edge treatments we have. They are important. They are absolutely important. But we need to go take a step back and say, what will help wellness? What will help well-being? Because health is a human right. And I think that's the fundamental core of what this task force actually would relate to ultimately. So when we talk about climate change and One Health, I'd just like to first start with the issue on climate change. And this is nothing new. We all know about it. We have the COP, we have the UNEP, we have WHO, we have ADB, we have governments, we have multiple organizations, medical organizations like ours, and even civil society working towards and addressing the issue of climate change. But we're still far from achieving the milestones. And I think what India's presidency could do is actually to look for immediate, short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals that actually could stretch across the years. And this way we could achieve our target set by the United Nations also. So global epidemiological studies have shown that climate change, reduced biodiversity, indoor and outdoor pollution, including microplastics, they affect the health, especially non-communicable diseases, which are lifestyle diseases, which actually is a major burden today, especially as countries are becoming more and more economically developed. This impacts not only their physical health, but also their work productivity, their mental health, and the health spends, thereby affecting the economies of the nation. And this is even worse in resource-poor settings. The health benefits of a natural world are incalculable, as already very elegantly shown by my previous speaker, Professor Khosla, that nature provides clean, breathable air, drinkable water, and productive soils, and medicines that actually are plant-derived, and a buffer against emerging zoonotic diseases. With planetary and human health at a crisis, all these benefits are at a risk. They're under threat. Therefore, climate action and mitigation are essential for addressing the impact of environment on health trajectories. When we talk about this, we should look back, and we see that human activity since the start of the industrial age has increased fossil fuel utilization, emission of heat trapping, greenhouse gases, rise in global surface temperatures, and frequency and duration of severe weather events that I will address as we go on. Currently, the global temperatures are around 1.1 degrees Celsius, higher than the prehistoric times, and are projected to rise further to between 1.5 to 4.4 by 2100. And that's what we need to stop. The human exposome, which is the cumulative measure of all environmental exposures, be it biological, chemical, or physical, are encountered by an individual in a lifetime, is also adversely affected by climate change. And these modifications in the exposome have led to a higher prevalence of non-communicable immune diseases like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, allergies, asthma, and so on. When you talk about these global changes and consequences of health, let's look at the different categories here. Well, we have climate change, we have globalization of movements and migration of people and products, we have human and domestic animal demography, we have pollution, which is air, food, and also water. We have increase in artificial movements. We have loss of biodiversity, which is a crucial issue. We have antimicrobial resistance, and we have the intensification of modes of animal and plant production. Now, all these actually lead to, or they are linked to the threats of the health, but they're not a threat just for human health. They are a threat for human, animal, plant, and the environment or our ecosystem itself. When we talk about climate change, again, climate change leads to wildfires, sandstorms, dust storms, thunderstorms, because thunderstorms asthma is again a thing which is very well known in many parts of the world. Started in, I think the first one was reported in UK, and then most recently in Melbourne in our region in Asia Pacific. Heat waves, floods, droughts, air, water, and food pollution, greenhouse gases, biocontaminants, all of these have an impact on the NCDs and communicable diseases, and the impact is huge. Urbanization, lack of exercise, lack of exposure to sunlight, decreased exposure to biodiverse environments because of the loss of biodiversity that we see here, and the lack of diversity in our diets, the use of different preservatives and non-unhealthy kind of foods, the increased use of antibiotics, and the increased hygiene more than what is necessary, they all lead to a microbial dysbiosis. The human body has more microbiomes than the cells, and these microbiomes help to maintain homeostasis or our immune system in a healthy state. Any disruption to that microbiome programs even a child at birth to diseases. And so even maternal diet plays an important role, and that comes to the point of immune metabolism or nutrition, which also needs to be addressed when we are talking about life and environment and well-being. And the most vulnerable population are children, pregnant women, those with pre-existing conditions, and the elderly or the disabled people, those from underserved areas, and the indigenous people. So when we talk about the different aspects of the global change that actually causes these climatic effects, we also know that there's a loss of biodiversity is crucial. And biodiversity is a key factor in maintaining a healthy and functioning ecosystem for human health. Variability among the living organisms of all sources. This includes diversity within species and diversity between species and of the ecosystem. So climate change, continuous deforestation, intensive land use, and loss of habitat, as also shown very elegantly by my prior speaker of the reduction in the number of tigers that you see today, loss of habitat have led to a loss of biodiversity. And loss of biodiversity again leads to chronic inflammatory non-communicable diseases, whether it's cancer, IBD, allergies, Crohn's disease, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, so on. Then we come to the point of pollution. And let's talk about air pollution. Air pollution, 3 million people die every year just from air pollution. And that is like a huge, and if you look at the burden of what air pollution does, it's more than what a pandemic can do when you see, if you actually add up everything over the years. And global warming actually contributes to that air pollution by increasing the frequency and severity of wildfires, sand and dust storms. The ozone concentrations are increases, and also from the cooling systems of air conditioners. And exposures to PM 2.5, PM 10, NO2 contribute to the risk of development of many diseases. And I would say, most of all in children, I would say asthma. And we know that when the pollution levels are really high, that leads to even having to close the schools. And this is a huge problem. So exposure to ozone has been associated with new onset asthma, with childhood asthma, and also is damaging to the lungs and to the lung tissues. In addition to air pollution, let's look at the impact on foods. What does climate change do to the foods? The climate change actually puts risk to the food supplies of people in developing and developed nations, both alike. Because they drive down crop yields, they destroy the livestock, and they interfere also with the transportation of the food. Rising carbon levels can also impact the nutrients in staple foods like rice and wheat. And when we look at the world population, we already know a large 800 million people do not have resources for food. But even those who have, 75% of the people who depend on plant-derived nutrients are affected, because the plants lose as much as 10% of the zinc, 5% of iron, and 8% of protein content due to this climate change. And what then happens? And these are essential nutrients for people's health and represent major risk to a variety of diseases. And it is worse in the developing countries, where we can identify deficiencies in zinc, in iron, and protein, leading to major disease burdens. And these diseases range from maternal mortality around childbirth to problems with neurodevelopment in children. Now, looking to the healthy immune system, which is the basis of a good health, or well-being. Well-being has to be related to a healthy immune system. So what is important in a healthy immune system? What we see here is the epithelium, or the outer layer that you see of all the different tissues in the organ, which interfaces with the environment, is usually like a big barrier and protects the human body from external insults. But what happens when these pollutants actually attack or really confront the epithelial layer? And what do? They actually cause a leaky epithelium. So the epithelial barrier is broken, and toxic substances such as detergents, household cleaners, packaged food emulsifiers, preservatives, as I mentioned before, pesticides, microplastics, which are becoming even more and more known now. More recent data shows that they damage the epithelial barrier, and they allow the penetration of toxic substances into the body, as well as they cause a disruption of the microbiota, and that disruption of the microbiota leads to many autoimmune diseases. We also know now that the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in many environmental changes, and these environmental changes can have short-term and long-term impact. And these short-term and long-term impact may cause a major impact on non-communicable diseases via the impact on the exposome, the genome, and the microbiome. So with the recognition of the imminent threats to health and the need for global cooperation, the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, which aims to limit the global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and as close to 1.5 as possible by promoting transitions towards low emission and climate resilient development. There is also at the same time the importance of recognizing the need for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in climate adaptation planning so that lower socioeconomic groups are not disproportionately affected. And this is a key role that G20 can play by actually making recommendations that cut across different cultures, different lifestyles, and different resource-based countries. So having said that, what climate change does, what the different aspects of climate change does to the human health, let's see what One Health is all about. So One Health is actually an integrated care that captures a holistic focus on human health with the ecosystem at the center. So it, in a broader way, is actually the systematic transformation needed to end the planetary crisis of climate change and biodiversity and so on. So basically, in One Health, you have the human health, you have the animal health, and you have the environment. And they're all interlinked. And the human health is affected by the diet and the nutrition, by the food security, by antimicrobial resistance or the antibiotics that they take, the social determinants, the human migration, and the human microbiome. And in the animal, the viruses and the bacteria, as well as the disease vectors, are from impact on animal health. And in the environment, you have climate change, air pollution, water pollution, deforestation, and reduced biodiversity. So what a One Health approach for climate and health leads to rapid urbanization, deforestation, storms, floods, precipitation of groundwater levels, and increasing sea levels. And the economic impact is a lot. So not only is there, as I mentioned earlier, there is an increased spend per person for healthcare, there is also an impact on the global economy or the GDP, which is an estimated 4 to 7% on the global GDP, expected to happen by 2050, just due to AMR. And then you have animal health, which again is increased incidence of animal disease outbreak or animal-borne disease outbreaks. We just kind of come out of one. And then human health with increased incidence of human disease outbreaks, not only in communicable diseases, but largely non-communicable diseases, which is a major burden today. And the health impact of that is increased propensity of zoonotic diseases, increased antimicrobial resistance, result in suboptimal human health, communicable and non-communicable disease, and increased stress on health, on human and animal health, as well as the ecosystem. When you talk about planetary health is defined as the health of the human civilization and the state of the natural systems on which it depends. Planetary health directs attention to the extensive degradation of our planet for the benefit of humans, as also clearly addressed by Professor Khosla. The concept focuses on sustainability by better balancing human needs with the preservation of the Earth's ecosystems in an effort to protect the health and well-being of future generations. To reverse planetary degradation and achieve sustainability is absolutely essential, but it requires a multidisciplinary effort and a cross-sector effort to change practices and policies at every level, and G20 is one of the best platforms for doing this. So we need to recognize the interdependence of human, animal, and environment health. We need to approach health issues and opportunities holistically using systematic thinking. We need to have interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary teams across human, animal, and environmental health practitioners. And we need to promote communication and collaboration among representatives of different governments and of global bodies, of private organizations, NGOs, and civil society. When you talk about the basic principles of integrated approaches to health, you have to think about systems thinking, an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach, participation, sustainability, gender and social equity, that is very important, and knowledge towards action. An interdisciplinary approach is basically research processes that do not include links, exchanges with other fields. So independently, the different disciplines actually work on a particular project and they come up with independent data. Multidisciplinary is when there is a single project dealing with climate change, and the field's results are put together and each answers one part of the problem. So they each independently address a different aspect of the problem. And interdisciplinary, again, works towards that. Transdisciplinary approach, again, works on the research in object, is a full part of the system. It is co-designed by the contribution of each component of the system, and strong involvement of civil society stakeholders in social ecological approaches to health is important. And this is even more important now because in our guidelines, we talk more about real world evidence, and we talk more about engaging the civil society or the patients in decisions for management of disease, which is again part of what we should think when we talk about well-being and life. So in conclusion, I would like to say that climate change is a global problem. And climate mitigation and adaptation is absolutely essential. Emission reduction and improving air quality is crucial. Health adaptation plans are also important to help non-communicable diseases in the face of climate challenge. Research needs to be done into the mitigation. Real-time analysis of geospatial, environment, and health data are needed because data-driven, science-based solutions are always stronger and more impactful. And the application of computer learning technologies and digital health play an important role in understanding the environment-human interactions. Big data analysis is very important, and artificial intelligence play an important role in this multi-dimensional relationships. Addressing air pollution is important, both outdoor and indoor. Improvements in the diet, nutrition, and agricultural practices are very important. Increasing biodiversity and reversing the loss of biodiversity is very important. And economic models of climate change interventions are crucial. So I'd call upon everyone that we work together towards climate mitigation and adaptation, but at the same time that we focus on One Health as an integrated approach, because that is the solution towards climate mitigation and adaptation. One Health provides the solution towards climate mitigation and adaptation. And what we need to also understand is that over and above everything else, the One Health approach would help prevent disease, zoonotic diseases, will reduce costs, will improve food safety and security, will save lives and prevent disease outbreaks, as I mentioned before, and also provide a more stable economy for the different countries. So with this, I would like to end my talk, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pavankar, for explaining to us a very, very complex subject and also providing some way forward and recommendation to address this and how to address perhaps life within life. So that is very, very important. I now move to Professor T.C. James, who is president of NIPO, not-profit intellectual property think tank. Perhaps he's one of the best known experts on intellectual property rights and its interlinkages with public health in India. He has been teaching in various universities and also has been at senior positions in the government of India, very senior negotiator for India as well. He has been member of Parliament of India Speakers Research Initiative and member of Academic Council of Universities. His work on traditional medicine and indigenous systems has been extensively used by India's policymakers, particularly in in the Ayush ministry. So he's extremely prolific with his writings and exposition on some of these areas. So I invite Professor James to share his thoughts, and thereafter we shall move for a round of discussion with all our coaches, and also with we shall take up some questions that may be in the chat box. Yes. Over to you, Professor James.
Thank you, Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, for this introduction. And my observations build upon what Professor Khosla and Professor Ruby Pavankar mentioned about the return to nature kind of a concepts. I mean, especially Dr. Ruby mentioned about the problems caused by climate change to health or environmental damage, resulting in bad health and loss of biodiversity and planetary health, how they affected and all that. She also mentioned about the concept of One Health. While I go with that thing, I want to share a few ideas slightly different from the conventional thinking on One Health. I mean, particularly in the context of lifestyle for environment. The objective is to stress the importance of traditional medicine in One Health. As Dr. Ruby mentioned, One Health recognizes the health of humans, domestic and wild animals, plants, and ecosystems are closely linked and interdependent. There is no doubt about it. But there has been for some time, this thing has been going on, particularly since 2004, when the One World, One Health conference was held in New York. And their approach was to aim to improve disease management by bringing together medical, veterinary, and environmental scientists and policy specialists. And that's how the whole thing subsequently developed also. And linking the emergence of zoonotic diseases to environmental degradation, the conference laid out an inclusive approach of preventing epidemic and episodic diseases while maintaining the integrity of ecosystems. And they formulated what later came to be known as the Manhattan Principles and called for an interdisciplinary approach for combating threats to the health of life on Earth. And so far as G20 is concerned, particularly since the German presidency, there has been talk about the concept of One Health and has been recommending action on the same from time to time. With the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been an increasing realization of the need for One Health. This pandemic is, of course, just the latest epidemic event that requires us to rethink and change our understanding of health, although in the past also such epidemics had come. And everyone feels now that health should no longer be conceived only in relation to human beings, but in unitary terms as a dimension that connects humans, animals, plants, and the environment. In general, alterations occurring in this articulated chain of life triggers a domino effect. And there are various international bodies like FAO, WHO, the World Organization for Animal Health, UN Environment Program. They all joined together and even, formed what is that, a quadripartite in support of these things. And their idea is to strengthen cooperation to sustainably balance and optimize the health of humans, animals, plants, and the environment. So, and in 2022, they supported during the last Indonesian presidency developing the Lombok G20 One Health policy brief. And this led to identification of 7 recommendations for countries to scale up integrated approach favored by One Health. And I'm in total agreement with that. Raise awareness and advocacy. Number 2, identify the gaps and opportunities. Improve One Health governance. Support One Health funding or investment. Use One Health joint plan of action as a blueprint for action. Implement One Health approach in all relevant policies. And 7th one was facilitate more research, knowledge, and capacity sharing in this area. And later, the World Bank estimated that between 10 to 11.5 billion US dollars a year is needed to implement this program globally. That's all fine. And then, but when I look at it, the Millennium Development Goals of 2000 or the Sustainable Development Goals of 2015, the approach has been in health was mostly target oriented. This is a disaggregated approach that may be good for measurements, but health is related to life and well-being, general immunity, as Dr. Ruby mentioned about it. So the SDG 3 targets are mostly human-centric, not what we are talking otherwise in One Health. While all this is good and required, we also need to look at certain basics, because it is necessary to make course corrections in the health programs and also to overcome what I consider a major challenge of mindset change. One Health approach involves a true epistemological and ethical change that appears neither easy to accomplish nor simple to implement through consistent policies. The main difficulty comes from the anthropocentric view of life that has influenced modern science and knowledge. The anthropocentric approach dominated, I would say, modern science and modern health for long. It refers to the point of view that humans are the only or primary holders of moral standing. We can see this in the willingness of humans to cause environmental damage for economic benefit. It benefits the humans. That's the approach. Environmentally concerned authors have been arguing in the past also that anthropocentrism is ethically wrong and at the root of ecological crisis. And these anthropocentric concerns for environment are narrowly aimed at preserving the welfare of humans, while the ecocentric or biocentric concerns are oriented towards protecting non-human organisms and nature as a whole. So in an ecocentric ethic, nature deserves moral consideration because nature has an intrinsic value. That is where the difference comes into this thing. The anthropocentric view, man is the measure of all things. As Protagoras, that 5th century BC Greek philosopher said, according to him, good and evil, right and wrong must always be judged in accordance with the human needs. This leads to the concept of conceiving environment as a utilitarian agency only. During the Renaissance period, man became the center, and the scientific and medical revolution that later emerged in the West was based on this philosophical approach. Whereas ancient Indian philosophy had a different perspective. It conceived man as a microcosm of the macrocosm, constantly interacting with each other. Human being is an integral and indispensable component of the universe. This interconnectedness of everything, both organic and inorganic, lies at the base of the Indian traditional medicine systems like Ayurveda. It looks at the health of an entire being and not merely as fighting any pathogen that causes discomfort in a being. Charaga says that all that exists in the universe also exists in the individual. True, it has different branches such as Vriksha Ayurveda or branches dealing with animal health like Mrig Ayurveda, etc. The science of Ayurveda emphasizes on the broader goal of universal care and planetary health, harmony between the mind, body, and spirit as a theoretical framework, and its operational framework includes universal health care and global wellness. So, this approach, I mean, truly we'll have to go with the One Health, because One Health implies the collaborative efforts of multiple disciplines working locally, nationally, and globally to attain optimal health for people, animals, and our environment. Not only in other, or rather simple words, you can say, you cannot tell the story of human health separate from that of the animal health or environmental health. So this approach recognizes that human health is strictly linked to that of animals, plants, and the environment, and these are the realms with which we continuously interact. This view is also found in other ancient medicine systems like medicines than only Ayurveda. For example, at the uh, one can visualize that when the medical history shows that at the onset of rational medical thinking, medicine people turn to the study of nature to understand the conditions of health and disease. In this perspective, it seemed normal to believe that human beings were dependent on the environment in which they lived and on other forms of life. In fact, Hippocrates, the Greek medicine man, considered that human being in its complexity from an ecological, biological, and social perspective. That's where he put that oath. It connected the body with climate, nutrition, age, and even psychological features. Health and diseases were inconceivable outside the environmental context. This unitary view of health has become increasingly important in recent years because many factors have affected the interactions between people, animals, plants, and the environment, which were so eloquently brought out by the previous speakers. When planning One Health, we must not forget this noble legacy and build on that. Otherwise, the disconnect can occur. That's what's happening. While One Health recognizes the connection among animals, people, and the environment. Yet, within the principle of health goal or sustainable development goal number 3, which I referred to, there remains a disconnect between patient focused preoccupation of clinical medicine and the population level objectives of the overall SDGs. The challenge is to design One Health programs that involve everyone who has a stake in the outcome. More than a billion people living in informal settlements, mostly in low and middle income countries, are exposed to pathogens through unsafe water and sanitation. The consequences of excluding key participants from decisions about essential services such as water and sanitation are clear from the kind of pollution and wastage which has been taking place, which also the previous speakers brought out. One Health solutions should rebalance power towards public interest through tighter regulations to prevent the pollution of rivers and coastal waters, inducements and penalties for polluters, and accurate pollution monitoring. For this reason, it has become apparent that one should protect the health not only of humans but also of the whole ecosystem and its components. Medicine should therefore change its epistemological stance. We are all constantly interacting with the biosphere, thus with the animal world, with the vegetable one, and with the inanimate one, including the air we breathe, or the water we drink, or the stones we use to build our homes. Today, the ecosystem is conceived as something that's outside of our body, but microbiology has shown that in addition to this external environment, or what we call macrobiome, so fundamental for the balance of the biosphere, our organism contains a great variety of internal ecosystems, microbiome, that are no less important to our health. The COVID-19 induced realization in many highlights how the human being is part of an uninterrupted biological chain that goes from microeconomic, microenvironmentalist populated by animals and plants to the microenvironment filled with germs with which we live in perennial symbiosis and which are essential for a healthy functioning of our organism. It is evident that any alteration of these macro and micro systems affect the balance between them, giving rise to pathological phenomena that inevitably affect human organism. So the point is that if we wish to avoid, reduce, or at least be prepared to consciously face future serious infections like COVID-19, which are likely to occur in an epidemic or pandemic form, an epistemological turn that leads to a One Health perspective can no longer be postponed. So the G20 should take the lead in integrating such systems which we inherited from the past into the One Health program. That is all that I want to say here. Thank you. Thanks for listening to me. I'm available.
Thank you, Professor James. Perhaps time has come for humanity to take a Hippocratic oath towards duties towards nature. Perhaps. So with this, may I now open the discussion for our co-chairs first, and I would request them to limit their comments and questions perhaps for the other panelists of the day. But if they have some specific comments, they're most welcome to share. And I already see some comments and questions coming in the chat box. So yes, now I invite Professor Sita Prabhu, who is also part of the task force, for her comments.
Thank you very much. Glad to join the seminar today. Very important issues have been highlighted regarding the way in which we should proceed ahead, particularly at the societal level and as well as the individual level. Now, the connecting, thread between the societal behavior and individual behavior, the changes that we want, will come about through change in values and norms. So the question is, how do we bring about the change in values and norms? Gandhiji, for example, was a very strong advocate of a particular way of life. Now, we do not have those advocates right now. And as you just mentioned, there has to be perhaps a Hippocratic oath about our responsibilities, because everywhere we have been talking of choices, we have been talking of freedoms, but they have to be circumscribed by responsibility. So is there a mechanism by which the values, because values take shape organically, how do we speed it up, and how do we sort of accelerate the change in norms, which is absolutely essential if individual behavior has to change and thereby change the societal norms? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Prabhu. Any other comments from our co-chairs? Anyone wishes to, bring up an idea?
I would like to make a short comment to Professor Sita Prabhu's.
Sure.
I think it's very, very important what you raised. And especially when we talk in the context of beyond India, because we're not talking about just India, we're talking about G20 countries. We're talking about countries that have different cultural values and cultural practices, and as well as different resources. So coming up with something that actually cuts across the different countries is crucial. And I think the concept of wellness, I think, is crucial. Is like, how do we achieve wellness? And through this wellness, I mean, it's a individual responsibility of how you lead your life, what you eat, what you drink, what you share, what you do in the environment around you, how it affects you and how it affects your children and how it affects the people around. That kind of a recommendation is important. And even for that, I think it's too short a time for the G20. The thing in the G20 recommendation, we can put something, but as a more continuing, because everything is continuing, we can't expect things to change just in 1 year or something, or 9 months. So is to do a certain kind of sharing of data, of trying to do surveys, of trying to do some studies across countries, and use that as a platform to show how this is impacting countries, and through a single protocol, trying to show how it's impacting the civil society everywhere, and how a well-behaved civil society, a more responsible civil society, could have a better impact. I mean, simple things like, for example, when we are, every action of ours has a reaction. So for example, we may like something, but it may not be good for the society. How do we restrain ourselves from doing that? How do we restrain ourselves from making that a practice, not just for us, but for the future generation? I don't know if I've really addressed what you said, but
Thank you, Dr. Pavankar. May I now move to Professor Gladys? Gladys, can you
Hello.
hear us? Yeah.
Yes.
Please ask
Is
your
it okay?
question. Yeah. Yeah. Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
No. I want to congratulate our friends and colleagues for their presentations because they all deal with very relevant issues affecting mankind, and they all show a very clear diagnosis. Anyway, although Mahatma has foreseen these problems concerning poverty, exclusion, more than 50 years ago, nothing, I mean, there is not a relevant progress in changing the world and improving present situations. So I'm
Gladys,
really
Professor
wonder,
Gladys,
yes.
you can, switch off your video because there may be low bandwidth. We cannot hear you
Now, can
clearly.
you hear me
So,
better? Anyway, if not, I have it written. So I'm just making a summary. I wanted to say that although that we have the best diagnosis, the humanity and G20 countries lack the political will because of economic interest to change things. So how we can change the minds, how we can change the situation? Is it a bottom top or a top bottom decision? And in between, I think the most important thing is education. uh, Nevertheless, I really doubt we have to put these issues in the agenda. The G20 has to know, the G20 countries, and as a task force, we have the responsibility to show the problems and to recommend the solutions. Anyway, sometimes I feel, and looking backwards to the history of IR for the last, let's say, 100 years, sometimes it seems that we just pour water in the river. And this is my main problem. We have to do things. It's important to do it. But if we see the results, which are the results? Has the G20 countries and even those who hold the big power changed their positions? What about the new industrial revolution and the fight between those countries? And we are unable to move forward and to change things. So I don't know. It's just maybe today I'm a bit pessimistic. Sorry. Thank you.
thank you, Professor Gladys. Uh, you know, uh, may I now request Dr. Nora, so if she has some answers to Gladys' questions or some other comments, yeah, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Gladys and colleagues, for this enriching discussion. So I think with the sustainable consumption and pursuing sustainable development overall, and this is the overarching theme here, it doesn't take one party to solve the problem. It requires a systematic change, and the solution lies with everyone basically. So the individual behavior is also impactful. I mean, I've seen some comments in the chat where this was questioned. But really, you need solutions at every level, at the global level, and this is typically setting the vision, setting the goals, like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Circular Economy Goals, and the reducing the carbon footprint goals. So it creates the vision, it creates the momentum and the drive. And then when we move at the country level, you have these instruments like the nationally determined contributions, the national priorities, energy mix targets, climate targets, and then the policies that would encourage individual behavior, a more sustainable individual behavior, but also sectoral objectives such as sustainable production. And we did discuss today the importance of sustainable consumption in relation to sustainable production as well. So it is systemic changes at the national level, and at the individual level, making more sustainable choices, more mindful consumption, and reducing, reusing, recycling, and removing also at the individual level. So it's applying these important concepts. And I talked in my contributions about integrating the circular carbon economy framework, which was endorsed by all the G20 countries, with the lifestyle for the environment, the Indian contribution, and this movement to encourage sustainable consumption at the individual level. So it's applying these important concepts at all the levels, the international, national, and individual, towards sustainable consumption. It really requires this whole holistic view and systemic view. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nora. We are just 4:30 in India now, so we have used our time, but we will extend it another 15 minutes to take up some questions. I see Dr. Khosla has already raised his hand, but I'll come back to you, sir. Let me take up some questions that are there in the chat box. I don't know if Professor James has already seen this question on homeopathy and its uses on as part of the Ayush system. So if you have any thoughts, Professor James, you can address that, and then I come to Dr. Khosla.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sabyasachi. I've seen that question. I agree with that, but it's not. While I referred to Indian systems of medicine because of its long philosophical background, doesn't mean that I exclude the other systems. That's why I even mentioned the Hippocrates and the Greek medical tradition. So homeopathy is good, but I'm not an expert on homeopathy, so I cannot say how the thing connects with that. Anyway, I welcome it. The second point is there is a major point by one person about how do you bring the mindset change. That was the entire focus of my talk. The mindset has to change because we have been taught and brought in certain mindsets which is looking forward to more amenities, more facilities, which is called improvement in life. Well, we all know what Professor Khosla mentioned about the Gandhian approach of enough for one's need but not for greed. The whole thing comes there. Every moment we are flooded with things which tell us, advertisement, other things, you need this thing, you need this thing. Something which is not necessary is put into our this thing. And this is dictated by the industrial world, the industries. It is not a question of mere north or south. It is the industries. I worked in the area of health. I know how the pharma industries tweaked the health policies international level at national level. So this is where the issue comes. Are we in a position to say no to certain things? That is where, that's what Dr. Khosla very well placed it. And Dr. Ruby also mentioned the question of how you have this controlling your demand, the consumer. Consumerism is what is there. And that is brought, we measure everything by, I would say, consumerism, GDP. In fact, RIS, Dr. Sabyasachi is also there. We have been working on a different kind of measurement of human well-being, wellness index. We have been working on that thing, something which measures not your material prosperity in terms of dollars or rupees or whatever you are having, but in terms of your happiness, as it is in the Bhutanese concept, wellness and well-being. So unless that comes and that predominates the mind of the people, the mindset will not change, will not come. But let us hope for that thing. I mean, while I agree with the Gladys about her pessimism when looking at around the things, but there is always hope. There is a ray of sunlight at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor James. I see a very specific question to Dr. Khosla, and of course he can add some more of his thought, is that how do we exit the vicious cycle or eliminating and recreating a poor class? And also related to his exposition on Gandhian philosophy is how to adopt Gandhian principles in today's world, perhaps. So these are the two questions that I see related, somewhat related. Dr. Khosla? Sir, you are on mute.
Unmuted now?
Yes,
Oh,
we can hear
great.
you.
Now, I would certainly be happy to try and answer the two questions you've raised, but because they're very important, and I think the G20 platform is appropriate for fundamental questions, questions of conflict and conflict resolution and societal choices and so on. And Dr. Rubik Paonker raised one very fundamental question, which I think really needs a little bit of work over the next few months in the G20 forums. And it is one that relates to the resolution of conflicts between fundamentally good things. We want to save the environment for ourselves and for future generations. We want to make houses for people. We may want, but many of these are often in conflict. And if we don't have mechanisms, institutional mechanisms, other than simply regulating and forbidding something to be done by governments, we will have major problems. You've got to have economic systems, you've got to have community and institutional systems that essentially can adjudicate between conflicting interests. And I have an example I'd like to give you because it's very concrete, it's very specific, and it illustrates the point very well. My organization works with frugal technologies, and we developed a technology which was amazingly efficient in terms of using fossil fuels for making red bricks to make houses. And it's called a vertical shaft brick kiln. It was a major breakthrough in terms of engineering innovation. And we started selling them to make bricks at a very low cost, at a very low energy, and very low carbon emissions. And we sold about 187 of these around the country, many of them in the state of Bihar. Now, Bihar is not a small state. It's 125 million people. It's bigger than most of the G20 countries. And we realized pretty soon after we started selling them that we were promoting the use of topsoil, because for red bricks, you need fine clay, and that is a source of food. Production of food was competing with making houses, and we realized that this wasn't going to work for very long, and was actually a choice that consciously had to be made by society using mechanisms like pricing and taxing and so on, to prevent people from using this soil, which had dual uses, and the use of food production has to be given a certain amount of importance, and so does housing have to be. And as an organization, because we are a social enterprise, and we have to deal with these kinds of conflicts, we ourselves actually stopped selling these machines, even though they were a source of very good revenue, because we felt that food production in Bihar would be majorly affected by selling these things. And we developed alternative building materials because of that. So there was a substitute we created, and we got the Bihar government actually to outlaw, prohibit the use of topsoil for red brick manufacture. And a similar thing happened with sand at another time. Now, the thing is that we could do that because we had two organizations, one making and selling stuff and making money, and the other one blowing the whistle, because it was an environmental organization, and its job was to be a guardian of the bigger welfare of humanity. And it was an internal decision. It was our own decision that we stopped selling something, even though it was profitable, because it was against the interests of the people, their health and their food production and so on. Now, the lesson I draw from that is that we were a very special instance where we had an internal mechanism to, even at our own cost, to say no to something that seemed to be a good thing to do, but it turned out was in conflict for something bigger than that, and we stopped manufacture of these things. I would like to say that the conclusion I draw from that is similar to something that she herself mentioned earlier in her talk, which is a strong civil society as the guardians of the welfare of people. There has to be a strong civil society who can blow the whistle when something, even by civil society, is being promoted as a good thing, because there's something that you are essentially losing in that process because of the conflicting requirements of welfare. And the other part, I would say, is that it's clearly important, particularly for the poorer countries in the G20, to have to promote the setting up of social enterprises, ones that have a social objective but work in the marketplace. And this is certainly what we're trying to do in India, and with some success. It seems to me that those are two lessons that actually come very clearly out of the question she raised about, the conflict of different social values being reconciled in some way. And I think our experience in India is that social enterprise, which is now quite a big thing around the world, is a major answer to that question. And your two questions about how do you bring about a conversion of people to be good, that's not so easy. You can't do it by preaching. You have to do it through self-interest. And I think Gandhiji, being a person from the business community, was somebody who understood that many of these transformations will not take place simply because you preach them. It's because you make them into an incentivized by either monetary or other gains that you can get. And I believe that the social enterprise is an answer to that question too.
Yeah, thank you.
Many people, the richer countries in G20 will object to the idea that you should constrain demand, constrain consumption. I've had innumerable arguments for the last 40 years with people who feel that we have no right to question their lifestyles, that their consumption patterns, because that's a God-given thing for them. But frankly, that has got to be done in their self-interest. We have to demonstrate that they are going to pay a heavy cost unless the whole globe becomes more viable.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Now I move to a comment. It's more of a comment from Mr. G.A. Tadas, who says that it is time we think of integrating certain life principles in government policy making as nudging strategy alone for inducing people to change lifestyles may not yield expected results, considering the gravity of the problems. Yes, the role of the government is very, very important. Let me take the last question, which I see is from the Directorate of Environment, Government of Uttar Pradesh. The question is specific. Do you think sustainable consumption and production is the best way to tackle climate change? And so this is the last question that I see, whether sustainable consumption and production is the best way to tackle climate change. Yes. Anyone, Dr. Nora, perhaps?
Thank you for the question. So as I mentioned, the solutions to climate change is not in one sector or one level or one solution. We require all solution, and every little bit helps. So sustainable consumption and sustainable production is certainly part of the solution to shift towards from a linear perspective towards a systemic and circular perspective. And this is what we're highlighting here, the circular economy and the need to address this from all perspectives. So even the individual level is also impactful, as well as the country level and the international level.
I'd just like to add one thing to what Nora has very nicely said. I think it really has to happen at multiple levels. And it's something which, I mean, the most basic thing is that it's affecting health. And it's really, I mean, we understand very well that, I mean, there is nothing that we can do without health. And it's just not physical health. It's physical health, it's mental health, it's heat stress. It's a lot of different things that actually climate change does to an individual. And most people may not even be aware of it. But the important point is to address all these collectively. And that's why this requires collective action. It requires collective actions with governments, with global bodies, with NGOs, with many organizations that are committed to it, whether it's medical or other scientific organizations, because science-based solutions are very important. And I think engaging civil society, making, encouraging civil society to be responsible for their actions, because this planet, as actually Mahatma Gandhi said, and also many others also have said, is this planet, we have actually just borrowed it. This doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the future. And if we don't have a future for the future generation, then I think we have done disservice by being on this planet. And I think that's a huge message that we need to get through in a language that is appropriate to the G20 countries.
Thank you, Dr. Pavankar. I think we have come to the close of a very, very productive session. I still see a hand raised from the screen of Professor Sita Prabhu. Unless she has any further comments, we would like to, move to the last part of our session today. I would request my colleague Saeed for proposing the vote of thanks, but I should also recognize the large participation that we saw today online. I should also acknowledge the presence of very senior diplomats from across our missions in different parts of the world. I see Ambassador Manish Prabhat, also Ambassador Ashok Kumar. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Also, our very own Ambassador Sudhir Devare, who is the chairman of RIS Research Advisory Council. I also see Director of IIT Guwahati, Professor P.K. Iyer, joined in for this session. So very, very eminent participants for this session as well. So with this, may I now request my colleague Saeed to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Dear colleagues and attendees, as we come to the close of our second session, I would like to thank the session chair, Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, for setting the context. Next, I extend my sincere thanks to the speakers in today's seminar, Dr. Nora Mansoori, Dr. Ashok Khosla, Professor Ruby Pavankar, and Professor T.C. James for their informative and insightful presentations on sustainable consumption and production, climate crisis, and One Health. My thanks to the audience. Your active involvement in the seminar really helped today's session come alive. Finally, I thank the co-chairs for the participation in the discussion, making for a vigorous and stimulating session overall. We hope to see you all again next on Friday, 14th of April, for the next installment of our seminar series, which is on infusing ethics and values in international relations. Thank you.
So a round of applause for everyone who joined in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a good evening or good morning, a good day or a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.